Xenon 2 Megablast is the critically acclaimed sequel to Xenon. It is the third game developed by the Bitmap brothers after Xenon and Speedball. Just like Xenon, it's a vertical shooter. David Whittaker worked on the music, but please don't go just yet. There's actually a very good reason to talk about Xenon 2 after the previous episode in Xenon. This time we are not going to dissect the structure or harmony of the music, but there is a lot of things to say about it, so this episode will be quite different. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Soundtracker. Today we are going to talk about the bombastic and groundbreaking soundtrack of Xenon 2 Megablast. Let's roll. Xenon 1 was, all things considered, a very classic game in terms of visuals and audio, even though I managed to ramble for 15 minutes on the first level song. But this time, the Bitmap brothers took a very different direction with the game overall design and the music specifically. The Bitmap brothers wanted to get away from the stereotype of game developers being dorky nerds and were one of the first game studios to construct a public image of themselves as rock stars. They were pioneers in that domain, having done photo shoots with leather jackets and sunglasses and posing in front of their publisher's helicopter. The sunglasses would become a recurring Easter egg found in their games in various places. We can definitely see some similarities with rock bands. Yeah, I just thought the comparison with Rush is funny because they're considered to be the nerds among rock stars. The choice they made concerning the music of Xenon 2 definitely reflects that image. Instead of asking David Whittaker to create music for the game, like he did for Xenon and Speedball, they asked him to recreate an actual radio song from a music producer called Tim Simonon, better known at the time as Bomb the Bass. To my knowledge, this is the first time a commercial song has been fully used in a video game. There are a few examples of video games using music from a record before, but it's usually just a snippet, or a very stripped down version. There is a great example of this with Captain Blood, which came out a year before and featured music from none other than French composer Jean-Michel Jarre. Philippe Ulrich, who designed the game, had a meeting with Jarre and he brought an Atari ST to show him an alpha version of the game. Jarre was so impressed with the capabilities of the ST, which was still pretty new technology at the time, that he gave Ulrich free license to use his song Ethnicolor from his 1984 album Zuluk in the game. Ulrich sampled a few chunks from the song and made his own version of it. However, the original song is more than 11 minutes long and what you hear in Captain Blood is only 2 minutes long and is much more repetitive. Ulrich's stroke of genius is to have put an emphasis on the strangest and most memorable part of the song, and it did fit the game perfectly. But as brilliant as the track is, it's like watching a trailer for a movie. The trailer takes bits and pieces from the movie, but it's edited completely differently, and you're missing out on a lot of things that happen in the movie. In the case of Xenon 2, however, the Bitmap brothers asked David Whittaker to recreate the entire Bomb the Bass track Megablast, Hip Hop and Precinct 13, which came out in 1988 on the album Into the Dragon. The name of the song is also the origin of the game's subtitle, Megablast. On the Atari ST, a very short section of the song is sampled, so it is similar to the Captain Blood soundtrack, but even shorter and simpler. However, on the Amiga, David Whittaker took advantage of the sample-based audio chip of the system and almost recreated the entire song. One question might be why something like this hasn't happened before, and the answer lies in 2 words. Technical limitations. When hearing this, I don't think a lot of people said, "Oh my god, it's the whole of the Mountain King music." It's not really the whole of the Mountain King symphony, it's just a simplified version with primitive sound that really doesn't sound like the original symphony. It raises an interesting question though, which is what constitutes a licensed song in a video game? I would argue that a song recreated with a chiptune is similar to an arrangement or a cover song, and while the soundtrack to Xenon 2 is far from being an exact replica of Bomb the Bass's track, it is still pretty damn close, and probably the closest a computer song has ever been to an actual radio song at the time it was made. So it's a matter of technology, because you need a system capable of playing samples with a high enough quality. But then you hit a brick wall in terms of limitations, and that is disk space. Let's take a 3-minute song. Right out of the bat, the MP3 algorithm wouldn't even be standardized until 1992, and the hardware of the time wouldn't even be powerful enough to simply play a file in MP3 format in real time. So that is completely out of the question. In audio CD quality, which is 44 kHz at 16 bits in stereo, 3 minutes of audio represent 30 megabytes of data. You can calculate that easily, as 44.1 kHz simply mean 44,100 information per second, and that information is coded with a 16-bit digit, which takes 2 bytes, because 1 byte equals 8 bits. Then multiply that by 2, because it's in stereo. Pretty close. Let's say we will downgrade it to 22 kHz at 8 bits in mono, and it's still 4 megabytes. Now, even if the MP3 algorithm is out of the equation, we can still have regular data compression, which was always used to store the maximum amount of data possible in such a small space. But it's still way too big for a low-density floppy disk like this, which can only hold 880 kilobytes of data. Yes, kids, that's less than 1 megabyte. You can fit more than 750 of these in an audio CD, or more than 5,000 in a DVD, or 30,000 in a Blu-ray, and I'm not even talking about high-density DVDs or Blu-rays. Most of you probably know that, but it's always a good thing to remind ourselves of how drastic the limitations were in those days. So, the brute force approach of just taking the digital audio and sampling it in the game is completely out of the question. Nowadays, it's not even remotely a problem. You can have your GTA 5 with 240 licensed songs in it, but in 1989, just one song is already exceeding the storage limits available of the systems of the time. Now the question is, how do we proceed? Luckily, Megablast, Hip Hop and Precinct 13 is well suited to be adapted on the Amiga. Megablast is basically made of a drum beat that is played during the whole song, with 2 main riffs played over it, as well as a small collection of short samples taken from other songs. A more traditional pop or rock song would have been much harder to pull off, because you would need to sample each vocal line. But with an instrumental track, it's a lot easier. And while the Amiga has a voice synthesizer, I don't think it's gonna cut it.
Hey,
what
are you talking shit behind my back?
Wow. Yeah, is the Amiga
Yay.
voice synthesizer.
Did you expect a Spanish Inquisition?
Look, we're not gonna need you on this one.
But I can sing
No.
anything. Check this out,
Look,
Dave.
no,
Dave. See. Give me your answer. True. I am half crazy, all for the love of you. It won't be a stylish map.
Look, we'll call you back, okay?
Screw you guys. I am going home.
So yeah, the song has vocals, but it's short samples taken from other records, except for the intro part, which has some rap lyrics, but David Whittaker took that part out, so there are compromises that had to be made, but the bulk of the song has been recreated on the Amiga, as faithfully as possible. The sample-based playback capabilities of the Amiga audio chip make it relatively easy to create music with any kind of sound you want. To make a beat, it works wonders. Just use a sample for the kick drum, one for the snare drum, a few cymbals, and you can make a cheap backing track that weighs only a few kilobytes of data. You just have to play these sounds in the order you want to have the beat you want. Let's have a look at the first riff. The song is in B-flat. There is a 2-note guitar riff, which is originally a sample from Unhooked Generation by Frida Payne, which has been sped up. Here is the original sample. If we speed it up, the note goes higher, and here it is at the speed it is played in Megablast. In order to save disk space, however, David Whittaker used this single short sound and made it play the same notes, like this. The bass underneath plays the root, the minor third, the minor seventh, and the root again. Since the song is in B-flat, that's B-flat, D-flat, A-flat, and B-flat again. With the drums, here is how it sounds. On top of all that, there is a high-pitched percussive sound that is a sample from Sound of a Drum by Ralph MacDonald. Once again, instead of taking that whole sample, Whittaker just used a single, short sound to recreate that part. Just play that sound with a similar rhythmic pattern as the original, and here you are. And to kick off that riff, we have a bombastic guitar hit, taken from the hip-hop song Rock the Bells by LL Cool J. The irony here is that sound was not created by LL Cool J, but is also a sample from AC/DC's 1983 song Flick of the Switch. Now you could ask, why not just say that the sample in Megablast was taken from AC/DC? Well, if we listen to it carefully, it's clear that the guitar sound has been modified in LL Cool J's song, and we can definitely hear that it is this one that is in Megablast, not the original AC/DC guitar hit. So we have a sample that has been put in a hip-hop song, then in another hip-hop song, then in the video game adaptation of that same song. Put it all together, and the end result is surprisingly close to the original Megablast track. Before going into the second riff, let's briefly talk about the infamous "Ah Yeah" sample that we've just heard, and which has been used everywhere, including in Amiga and ST soundtracks in sometimes weird and, shall we say, creative ways. The interesting thing is that David Whittaker did not seem to have access to the original source of the sample, which is from Alive by Run DMC. Oh yeah! Because in the Xenon 2 soundtrack, here is how the sample sounds, and listen to it carefully. Oh yeah! You can hear the Megablast track in the background, which means that Whittaker sampled the "Ah yeah" part directly from Megablast to include it in Xenon 2. So we have a short voice clip that has been sampled to be included in a hip-hop song that has been sampled to be included in the video game adaptation of that same song. The second riff is taken from John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13, which is referenced in the title of Megablast. It is not a direct sample from the movie soundtrack, as the notes are not played exactly the same way and the sound is different. Here is the theme from Assault on Precinct 13. And here is the version that we hear in Megablast. As you may have probably guessed by now, Whittaker recreated that melody by using this single sound, just like before. The notes are the root and the minor third, then the third and the fifth, then the minor seventh and the second, and finally the root and minor third again. As you can see, we have 4 groups of 2 notes, and the bass line on that riff, which is the same as previously, will be playing the same notes as the first note in each of these groups. So the bass follows the same movement as the theme from Assault on Precinct 13, so we can safely speculate that it was most likely written to fit that theme first, and then the rest of the song was built around it. Here is how this whole riff sounds in Xenon 2. Finally, we have a variation of the first riff with the same bass and drum pattern as previously, with a bell sound playing the root in 3 different octaves. Which is a sample from Money by Jimmy Spicer, played a half step higher. Here, Whittaker used a 1-note sample to play the first note, and the same sample played twice slower to play the second note, 1 octave lower. But used a different sample to play the third note, which is an octave higher than the first note. Why use different samples, you may ask? It's gonna be extremely obvious with an electric guitar sound. Let's first listen to an A. Now let's take the exact same A, sample it, speed it up to make it sound an octave higher. And let's compare that with a real high A. It definitely sounds artificial and not as rich as the natural sound. It can and has been used many times as an effect, but you cannot replicate the full range of an instrument with a single sample and make it sound natural. This is why sound banks are so huge, because you need a lot of different samples at different pitches to be able to do that. Going back to where we were. After the bell part, the first riff comes back and is played on top of it. And that is basically the skeleton of the song, and everything else consists of samples picked by Bomb the Bass to add some flavor. Like this one, for example, taken from You Can Make It If You Try by Sly and the Family Stone. That whole musical bit was sampled and sped up to sound a whole step higher, and simply put on top of the drum beat in Megablast and played twice. Whittaker had no choice but to sample that whole part entirely to put it in Xenon 2. He did it with low quality in order to save disk space, as we can hear. Another long sample from that song was put in Megablast, which is the following organ part. The interesting thing here is that the drums are on the right channel only on that song, so Bomb the Bass probably sampled the left channel only. Again, this was sped up the same way to fit Megablast's tempo and played twice in a row. While most oversamples are very short and sprinkled throughout the song, these two stand out as they are short riffs in and of themselves. Let's see another little example of how Whittaker managed to save disk space. Another sample in Megablast is this hit, followed by a quick ha sound from Itch and Scratch Part 2 by Rufus Thomas. In Megablast, that whole bit has been put as is in the song, and we can distinctively hear the bass drum and snare drum part of the sample over the beat of Megablast, and we can hear some quick double hits, so technically the execution is not perfect. Now, in the Amiga world, Whittaker just replicated that small part with two very short samples. The first hit and just one played quickly 4 times in a row to sound like the original record. Because once again, it's a lot more memory efficient to have a short sample played several times in a row than a longer sample played once. So I think by now you can understand the gist of it and appreciate all the work that went into adapting a song to a medium that is not suited to such a task. Try to listen to the 2 versions for yourself and spot the main differences. Now, to end this video with a little fun, let's quickly compare all the different versions of Xenon 2 back to back. Warning, it's not pretty. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why the Amiga was the king of video game soundtrack in the late 80s. Even the Jaguar had a port of Xenon 2 much later, and they had a new soundtrack made for it. But let's be frank, it's just a bland, generic electronic soundtrack that really lacks the punch of the Bomb the Bass track. And more importantly, it lacks the originality of it, which is one of the main reasons why this soundtrack has become one of the most famous of the Amiga library. The Bitmap Brothers' decision of adapting a bombastic hip-hop track in their space shooter was daring and made their game memorable. This was episode 2 of Soundtracker. Thank you for watching, leave your suggestions for future episodes in the comments below. Have a fantastic day, and may the metal and the 8-bits be with you.